Thank you for joining us today. Today we are going to give a presentation on ordinances, resolutions, and proclamations. Joining me today is Tammy Testa, the City Clerk Treasurer for the City of Council, and I'm Renata McLeod, the City Clerk for the City of Coeur d'Alene. We're going to give you a little bit of information on what's the scoop. What do these documents do for you? How do you use them? When do you use them? Why do we even use them? Hopefully, at the end of this presentation, you will have a good understanding of the basics of all.
So, disclaimer, we are presenting some of the basics obtained in the Idaho Code and the AIC Resolution Ordinance Manual. We are not attorneys, so as a rule of thumb, go back to the phrase that we hear a lot, CYA, consult your attorney. So today we're covering, like Renata said, ordinances, resolutions, and proclamations. So what is an ordinance? It's a document that creates city laws that are equal to statutes and state law. A resolution is used as a binding decision of the council and is used for administrative matters. And a proclamation is an official formal announcement issued by a person of authority.
So we're going to take each one of these topics one at a time. So we're going to cover ordinances first. So what does an ordinance do? An ordinance is a document that regulates people or properties within your own city limits. It can do things like authorizing bonds, and obviously every year you have an ordinance that approves your annual appropriation, your budget.
So again, CYA, consult your attorney. So ordinances should contain a title, which is a brief outline explaining the code. It should have a section with a number and a title. Penalties conform to the statute and have a savings clause and severability clause. Clarity that replaces repealed codes.
So those are words you hear a lot of times from the attorneys. Every time you read a title, it usually says and includes a savings and severability clause. It's always hard words to get out while you're reading in public.
Yeah, I don't like reading that one.
But it needs to be really clear that whatever, especially in municipal code changes, that it replaces the other codes so you don't have duplication and confusion down the line.
Right.
So an ordinance, remember that until it's passed, it really isn't an ordinance. So some of the cities, such as mine, issues a council bill number. So this helps us keep track of these documents, maybe when they're in draft form, or if they go to council, council kicks it back and says that they want more information for staff to bring back, and maybe it's going to be 3 meetings before staff gathers all the details they want. In the meantime, like in a city our size, we could have had several ordinances come forward during that time. So if you issue it an ordinance number before it is approved, you could have several out of order chronologically. Then when you go to find them later on, 5 years down the road, things are just more difficult to find because they're not chronologically numbered appropriately. Mm-hmm. But for Tammy's size, you don't do council bill numbers,
No,
and why
don't.
Is that?
We don't do council bill numbers because we maybe have 2 or 3 ordinances a year, most likely 2. So it just doesn't make sense for us to do that.
Right. So again, it's dependent on your city size and what your city needs.
Right.
But just know this is an option that's out there.
Ordinances and how to adopt. Let's see. So before it can take effect, you must conduct a legal reading and pass by roll call vote. It has to be signed by the mayor and attested by the clerk, given a number, and published in the notice in the paper or by mail. So the title summary must be published once within 30 days.
So this sometimes becomes an issue for a city like us because we'll have an annexation ordinance go to council, but we won't publish the title until somebody has come in and paid all their annexation fees. And sometimes developers take a little extra time coming through the door, so this gives us a little bit of a stick to carry for them to come in and make their payments. But if they don't get in within 30 days, they have to go back through council. That's how we deal with it. But here's a little example of how you put it on your agenda as well, because sometimes they're just a little different. So in that first example of Council Bill 19-1016, it's a municipal code change. So we're really just giving what chapter we're amending and what we're doing so that people outside of the city understand this is the agenda item and what we're doing. If they want to know specifically what's going to be changed in that, they can go to the website and find the draft. Then directly below that, you'll see how we notice our annexation hearing and what action we're bringing forward. So we hold the hearing one night, and then we bring back the annexation ordinance and agreement another night. It helps with the perception that the deal's done when you have your public hearing, so we bring it back at another time. But it helps the council to remember when it was brought forward by putting that pursuant to council action date on there, so they can remember they've already heard this item. But again, you'll see, we reference them as council bills, not ordinances at this time.
What is the deal with reading a title?
Boy.
What is the deal, Renata?
I know, that is a deal. Some of us clerks have had some pretty hefty titles to read.
Yeah. So reading rules, traditions or reality. The rule traditionally requires the title to be read 3 times before passing the ordinance. However, the reality is that most council waive the reading, so the clerk only has to read it once.
Thank goodness.
We do in our city, thank goodness. And also it helps because our city only has 1 council meeting a month, so we would never be passing an ordinance if we were reading it 3 times. It would take months to do that.
Right. And when you have those titles that have like 20 municipal code sections being amended, and you're reading chapter 17.2.100.102.103. Oh my gosh, is there room for error?
Yeah.
So it does become a thing. But luckily, we've included a motion up on the screen for you that is a simple, just a motion to dispense with the rule. The rule being the requirement to read 3 times and having the clerk only read the title once. So if your council doesn't do that for you yet, really push this one forward.
Yo, wait a second, man. Something just ain't sounding right, yo. Let her know.
Ordinances, whoops. Oh my gosh, what happens if you make an error in your ordinance? Well, it depends on what kind of error. There's this thing called a Scrivener's error. Who knew that word existed before you were a city clerk? Oh my gosh. But if there is just a minor typographical error, it says he versus she, the is missing, those are all things that are pretty easy to get fixed. Sometimes if you codify your ordinances, the codifier can find things like a minor error in the numbering. Those are things that, at least in our legal department, have agreed with the codifier that they're a minor error and we can correct them at that point. But there are some that are substantive. So if it's a huge change in the dollar amount or the location of something, that's probably going to be something you're going to need to take back to council. Again, CYA, consult your attorney. If in doubt, check with your attorney.
Jurisdiction and applicability. So your city ordinances are not applicable outside of the city limits or within the area of impact. So feel free to borrow ordinances from other cities similar in size, just to make sure that what they have will work for your city.
Right. So there's some examples of some of the things that maybe we do here in Coeur d'Alene with a population of 55,000, with a staffing level of 420, that maybe you just couldn't do in the city of council with, what is your staffing level? 2. So I think, those are the type of things that were cautionary tales, that it sounds great on paper and we really love how that city's doing it, but really have some discussions about, does it work for your city? Can you make it work in your own city?
Right. And the big thing, too, that our attorney will talk to us about is don't put something in your ordinance if you are not going to be able to enforce it.
Or willing to
enforce it.
We have
Correct.
a few of those.
Yep.
They last on the books for a long time.
Yeah.
So resolutions. What do resolutions do? Resolutions are unique and different from ordinances. So when you hear these terms, this is the change of direction. So for ordinances, you heard that's a jurisdictional document. It's setting up codes and laws for your community and the people within your community. Resolutions are different. They're about policies and procedures. They're councils approving contracts and agreements. This is how you approve your fees for your city, or you should be approving fees for your city through resolutions. We have in ours that for the destruction of public records in accordance to your records retention manual. That should all be done by resolution. So even though a subject matter feels administrative, sometimes it's proper for it to be a resolution, but sometimes there's a state code that prohibits you from doing things a certain way. So it's always important to check with your attorneys, to check with your codes, just make sure you're following things the way that it's set up. And if in doubt, check with your attorney.
CYA. So resolution keys. Never amend a resolution, rather just replace it. Never try to govern the public with a resolution. You cannot amend an ordinance with a resolution or a resolution with an ordinance. A resolution and a motion are equals. A resolution is essentially a written motion. And establish a different numbering system. So in our codification process a few years ago, historically our city just numbered everything. Regardless if it was a resolution or an ordinance, it just got the next number. When we codified, it hence left a big gap in there. Numbers are missing. So now we have a separate numbering system. Our ordinances are all consecutive, 3 number digits, because we're only up to 520, I think. And our resolutions go from the year, so 2020, 01. They start with 01 at the beginning of the year, and then they go on from there.
Yep, and ours mirrors that, except for we have a little larger numbering system. So our ordinance are up to about 3,600 now, and you can track back all the way to ordinance number 1 in the history of the city, and they're consecutively numbered. We
Right.
don't have the gaps because they were smart enough back in 1879 or 1898, I can't remember now, long time ago, to set up that numbering system so it's different. But it's not detrimental. Like Tammy lived through her renumbering. If you step into a situation where you're in a new city and they didn't do it, it's never too late to start. Start to get it organized, get those things cleaned up. You may or may not choose to codify your ordinances and codes, but if you do, usually that's a big help in keeping you numerically correct.
Yeah.
To publish or hold a hearing on a resolution. This is where it gets confusing, right? Like, you should only have to do that for ordinances. Why do we have to do that with resolutions? They're 2 separate things. They should not cross.
Right.
However, sometimes they do. So 2 examples we could come up with, you may come up with others, but it is the increase of fees by more than 5%. The Idaho Code requires you to hold a public hearing for approving those fees. And then we do it with the adoption of a resolution, not an ordinance. And we've tried to take all fees out of all municipal code sections because it costs a lot more to recodify those codes than to just pass a resolution. And now we have this new thing, that resolution for foregone taxes.
Yes.
Why they gotta add more stuff to our plate, right?
Right.
So now, that resolution to reserve your foregone taxes requires a public hearing. However, it's done via resolution. So it's another oddity.
Can be in conjunction with your budget hearing.
And that's the easiest way to do it. So
Yes.
we added just another sentence to our notice of our public hearing for our budget that says we're also going to hear testimony about reserving the foregone taxes. So try and keep it simple, but make sure you hold that hearing. Here's just an example for our city of how we amend fees. So we do a simple resolution, then we do by department, and we underline the new fees, and we show the strikeouts for what we're removing. So that just seems to kind of keep things on track. I have a master list of all the departments in my own files, and we found some things that some departments were off a little compared to what I had as the most recently adopted resolution. So another thing to kind of keep track of as you go forward with annual reviews of fees is a great idea.
What would you do?
Declaration of emergency. We kind of slid that one in. It's a little blend of all sorts of things for the fun year of what we're calling 2020. So if we had a live audience, we'd probably at this point ask you all how many people in this room saw the following: special call council meetings, emergency council meetings with less than 24-hour notice, outreach to media requirements, posting public notices in 5 different locations when half your public locations are closed. I mean, we got some fun out of 2020 and the COVID-19 virus. So the declaration of emergency in our city required 2 steps. So we actually entered into an ordinance with our council giving authority for the mayor to declare an emergency in a public health arena. So we didn't have to come back every time something happened regarding COVID. They kind of gave him an overarching authority with that ordinance. Then we came through with a public health order, which is actually a resolution, but because public health orders are specific and odd and unique, it got its own numbering system. So you can see that was the second one in 2020 that we brought forward. And this is the one where we ended up closing bars and restaurants prior to the governor's order, and we had to find 5 different public buildings to post it to on a Saturday afternoon. So there are some unique and interesting codes revolving declarations of emergencies. Again, we're not legal experts. We work very closely with our attorneys when you're doing something as dramatic as this. But we wanted to put it in as a good reminder that there are times where you get thrown a curveball and you really have to work closely with your legal counsel.
Proclamations. The city proclaims what?
Everything!
The proclamation is in support or declaration that is non-binding. Most of the time, these come forward as a request from an organization, nonprofit, human rights groups, ADA advocate groups. The main ones we do at our city are Fair Housing Proclamation, Week of the Young Child, Arbor Day. The gamut is array of proclamations.
And we have some that come in that just want the mayor to read it at a certain event, or they just want the mayor to sign it and they read it at their event, and others that want to accept it at a city council meeting and make it be a little more formal. So it can be a myriad of things. We've had, support of Juvenile Diabetes Week. Here's the example of a proclamation for Constitution Week, and it was basically supporting the Constitution and human rights for a week. We have almost annually support of Volunteers Week, and it suggests people go out and volunteer at nonprofits for that 1 week a year. So it can be a myriad of things.
Yeah, so those can be read at a meeting or simply at the event.
Right. And we have ours put on fancy paper and give it a nice little metal seal of the city of Coeur d'Alene. Some organizations like to hang it on their wall. Some organizations just like to display it on their website. So we try to give them a nice copy for their records. Or like the Fair Housing Week, we scan that on our website. We direct realtors there because they need it sometimes for their certifications. So we try and make it a little fancy and make it feel good.
So since we don't have a live audience, we have scripted some Q&As for you. And we also have a special guest with us to help us with these questions. Please welcome Melissa Taylor from the city of Rathdrum. She is the finance director and one of our very close friends, and we're so thankful to have her here.
Yes, thank you, Melissa.
Ladies, so what do you do if the council makes a motion during the meeting? Do you roll call or not?
Well, we like to say a good rule of thumb is when in doubt, roll call it out. It never hurts.
Are ordinances as binding as resolutions?
Ordinances regulate people and property. Resolutions are equal to a motion and are used for the adoption of policies, procedures, and agreements.
Can the mayor proclaim anything?
They sure can. So can the council.
What do you do if the vote is tied?
The mayor will vote in the event of a tie.
And only gets to vote in the event of a tie.
Correct.
Can a resolution and an ordinance both be vetoed?
No, an ordinance can be vetoed by the mayor. A resolution cannot, but it can be superseded by another motion of the council.
Should a city codify their code?
It does help to have a compilation of local ordinances in one place. It provides a place to trace what has been repealed or replaced. It can also help to heal imperfections such as numbering and Scrivener's errors, as the codifier provides a second set of eyes.
Do all ordinances get codified?
No, they do not. The budget ordinances, annexation ordinances, vacations, rezones, franchise do not. If the city chooses to codify, that is. Not all cities will codify their code.
Can a city decide whether or not a code is an infraction or a misdemeanor?
Yes, they can, as long as it is not less strict than the state code.
So we thank you so much for your time today. We have enjoyed presenting this information to you, and we look forward to any additional questions, and we hope to see you at a one-on-one conference in the near future.
Yes.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.